unexpected reunion, the botanical gardens buzzed with activity as Naomi Winters adjusted her name tag and surveyed the conference hall. 7 years of research on sustainable agriculture had led to this moment. Her first keynote presentation at the International Botanical Symposium. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Dr. Winters, your slides are ready," her assistant informed her, handing over a tablet. Naomi nodded, taking a deep breath. At 32, she had built her reputation meticulously, transforming from a shy girl who preferred plants to people into a respected botanist whose drought-resistant crop varieties were changing farming in developing regions. As she scanned the crowded reception area, her breath caught. Through the sea of academics and researchers, a familiar profile stood out, tall, with shoulders that carried confidence as naturally as breathing. Julian Reeves, the last person she expected to see at a botanical conference. "It can't be," she whispered, almost dropping her water glass. Before she could retreat, he turned and their eyes met across the room. Recognition flashed in his expression, followed by a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes, the same smile that had gotten them both out of trouble countless times during their childhood in Somerset Valley. Julian excused himself from his conversation and made his way toward her. Time had been kind to him, refining rather than changing his features. His dark hair was shorter now, with subtle touches of silver at the temples that somehow made him look more distinguished. The boy who once helped her build Treehouse Laboratories had transformed into the founder of Ecotech Solutions, a company revolutionizing sustainable technology. "Naomi Winters," he said, his voice carrying the same warmth she remembered. "Still saving the world, one plant at a time?" "Julian," she managed, finding her voice. "What brings a tech mogul to a gathering of soil-obsessed scientists?" He laughed, the sound instantly familiar. "My company is looking to partner with agricultural researchers. But I had no idea you'd be here." His eyes took her in, noting the changes time had brought. "Though I should have guessed. Your research on drought-resistant crops made quite a splash." "You've heard about my work?" she asked, surprised. "I make it a point to keep track of brilliant minds," he replied, then added more softly, "especially when they belong to old friends." The conversation flowed easily between them. Years. Melting away, Julian listened attentively as she explained her upcoming presentation, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite conversation. "Your keynote starts soon," he noted, checking his watch. "Would you allow me to take you to dinner afterward? To celebrate your success and catch up properly?" Naomi hesitated. Their paths had diverged so completely after high school. She to university on scholarship, he to build his empire. They had once been inseparable, sharing secrets and dreams under the old oak tree behind her grandmother's house. But people changed. Life changed them. "I'd like that," she found herself saying, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Hours later, after her presentation had received a standing ovation, they sat in a quiet corner of an upscale restaurant. Julian raised his glass. "To the brilliant Dr. Winters, whose work will change countless lives." As they talked late into the evening, sharing stories of the years between then and now, Naomi felt something long dormant awakening. Not just nostalgia, but something new and uncertain. A possibility she hadn't allowed herself to consider in years. "I've missed this," Julian admitted as they walked under the city lights. "I've missed you, Naomi." The simple honesty in his voice made her look up at him, really look at the man he'd become. And for the first time in years, Naomi Winters wondered if some paths were meant to cross again. Gardens of Memory. The invitation arrived on Naomi's desk 3 weeks after the botanical conference, an elegant cream envelope containing Charlotte and Daniel's wedding invitation. Charlotte had been their mutual friend since high school, the three of them forming an inseparable trio before life pulled them in different directions. +1, Naomi murmured, her finger tracing the embossed letters. Her mind immediately wandered to Julian. They'd exchanged numbers at the conference, and occasional texts had evolved into late-night phone calls that left her smiling into the darkness of her apartment. As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone lit up with his name. "I just got Charlotte's invitation," Julian said when she answered. "Are you going?" "Of course." "I'm helping with the botanical arrangements," Naomi replied, feeling a flutter of anticipation. "Charlotte insisted on having my magical touch with the flowers." "Then I'll definitely be there." His voice carried a smile. "Maybe you could use an assistant? I'm quite good at following directions." 3 days before the wedding, Naomi found herself in the expansive gardens of the Rosewood estate, directing Julian as they arranged native wildflowers and sustainable greenery for the ceremony. The afternoon sun filtered through ancient oak trees, casting dappled patterns across the lawn where rows of chairs awaited weekend guests. "Hand me that twine," Naomi instructed, balancing on a stepladder as she secured trailing vines to the wedding arch. Julian passed it up, his fingers brushing against hers. "You know what this reminds me of?" he asked, steadying the ladder with one hand. "That science fair project in 10th grade. The one with the living ecosystem." Naomi laughed, the memory vivid. "We stayed up all night getting those terrariums perfect. Your mom found us asleep on the floor surrounded by soil and glass jars." "We won first place," Julian reminded her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Because of your presentation. You always could charm a crowd." She stepped down, admiring their work. "Some things never change." He shook his head. "Some things do. I was terrified back then, just better at hiding it." His expression grew thoughtful. "I'm still good at hiding things, I suppose." Before she could ask what he meant, Charlotte arrived, exclaiming over the floral arrangements and whisking Naomi away for final wedding details. The evening before the wedding, the rehearsal dinner stretched into a night of celebration. Under a canopy of string lights, old friends reconnected, sharing stories that bridged the years between then and now. Julian remained close to Naomi's side, his presence both comforting and increasingly distracting. "Dance with me," he said as the small band played a slow melody. He extended his hand, and without hesitation, she took it. On the makeshift dance floor, his hand rested lightly against the small of her back, guiding her in gentle circles. The familiar scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and something uniquely him enveloped her senses. "Do you remember teaching me to dance before prom?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. Naomi smiled against his shoulder. "You were hopeless, stepped on my toes at least 20 times. And yet you still went with me when Rachel canceled." "As friends?" she reminded him, though something in his expression made her wonder if there had been more to it even then. "Always as friends," he agreed, a note in his voice she couldn't quite decipher. When the song ended, they remained close, reluctant to break the spell that seemed to have fallen over them. Julian's gaze dropped to her lips for just a moment before he stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should get you home. Big day tomorrow." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. Guests gathered in the gardens where Naomi and Julian had worked, exclaiming over the natural beauty of the arrangements. Naomi, in a sage-green bridesmaid's dress, caught Julian's eye as she walked down the aisle ahead of the bride. The intensity of his gaze followed her, making her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with the ceremony. Charlotte and Daniel exchanged vows beneath the arch of flowers, their happiness radiating outward. Naomi found herself glancing at Julian throughout the ceremony, finding his eyes already on her each time. At the reception, after champagne flowed freely and speeches brought both laughter and tears, Julian found her at the edge of the dance floor. "You look beautiful," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "Like something from one of your botanical books, a rare bloom." She felt a blush warm her cheeks. "You clean up pretty well yourself." They watched the couples dancing, comfortable silence stretching between them until Julian spoke again. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if we'd taken different paths? If we hadn't been so focused on being the perfect friends?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with possibility. Naomi's heart pounded as she considered her answer. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but we can't change the past." "No," Julian agreed, his fingers brushing against hers on the table. "But the present is still ours to shape." As the night deepened and the celebration continued around them, something shifted between them, subtle yet undeniable. Each touch lingered longer, each glance held deeper meaning. And when Julian suggested they take a walk through the illuminated gardens, away from the music and laughter, Naomi found herself following without hesitation. Under the light of a full moon, surrounded by the flowers they had arranged together, Julian stopped and turned to her. His hand reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, the touch sending electricity through her veins. "Naomi," he whispered, her name a question and an answer all at once. And as the distant sounds of celebration faded around them, she leaned forward and gave him the answer they had both been waiting for. Dawn confessions, morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains, casting a golden glow across the hotel room. Naomi stirred, consciousness returning in gentle waves until reality crashed over her. She was in Julian's room, in his bed. The events of the previous night rushed back. His hands in her hair, whispered confessions between kisses, boundaries crossed that could never be redrawn. She turned to find him still asleep, his features relaxed in a way she had rarely seen. For a moment, she allowed herself to trace the line of his jaw with her gaze, to memorize the pattern of his breathing. Then panic set in. What had they done? 20 years of friendship altered in a single night of champagne and unguarded emotions. Slipping from beneath the sheets, Naomi gathered her scattered clothes with trembling hands. Each second that passed increased her certainty that she had made a terrible mistake. Julian wasn't just anyone. He was her oldest friend, her confidant, the person who knew her when she was nothing more than a shy girl with dirt under her fingernails and dreams too big for their small town. And now he was Julian Reeves, the tech visionary whose face graced magazine covers, whose wealth had transformed him into someone who moved in circles she could barely imagine. What could last between them beyond this moment? How long before the novelty of reconnecting wore off and he remembered the fundamental differences in their worlds? Worse still was the knowledge that losing him as a lover would mean losing him entirely. Friendship couldn't survive this kind of complication. She had seen it happen too many times. As she zipped her bridesmaid dress with shaking fingers, Julian stirred. "Leaving without saying goodbye?" His voice was husky with sleep, but his eyes were alert, watching her with an intensity that made her look away. "I have an early flight," she lied, knowing her return ticket wasn't until tomorrow. "Back to the research station." Julian sat up, sheets pooling around his waist. "Naomi, about last night—" "It's okay," she interrupted quickly, unable to bear. Hearing him call it a mistake. Better to say it herself. "We got caught up in the moment. Wedding emotions, champagne, old memories, these things happen." Something flickered across his expression. Hurt, perhaps, or disappointment. "Is that all it was to you? A wedding cliché?" Naomi busied herself with finding her shoes, avoiding his gaze. "We should be grateful it didn't happen sooner and complicate things between us." "Complicate things," he repeated flatly. "That's an interesting way to describe what happened." She finally looked at him, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "Julian, you're my oldest friend. That means too much to risk on whatever this was. And what if I told you I've wanted whatever this was for 20 years? The question hung in the air between them, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. Naomi froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Don't say things you don't mean." Julian pushed back the covers and stood, pulling on his trousers before approaching her. "When have I ever said something to you I didn't mean?" She took a step back, maintaining distance. "People say all kinds of things after nights like this. But tomorrow, or next week, or next month, reality sets in." She gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the world beyond. "Your reality is board meetings and innovation awards and private jets. Mine is research grants and fieldwork and university. Politics. That's what you're afraid of? That our lives are too different?" Frustration edged into his voice. "Naomi, I built my entire company around the principles you taught me about sustainability and respect for natural systems. You've shaped my world even when you weren't in it." The sincerity in his words threatened to unravel her resolve. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to wake up beside him every morning, to build something together, beyond friendship, but fear of loss, of change, of inadequacy, won out. "I need time," she said finally, reaching for the door handle. "This is all happening too fast." "Naomi, please, Julian, just give me space to think." Before he could respond, before she could change her mind, Naomi slipped out the door and down the hotel corridor. By the time she reached her own room, tears blurred her vision. She ignored the buzzing of her phone, knowing it was him, knowing that if she heard his voice, her carefully constructed walls might crumble. Instead, she changed her flight, packed her bags, and left a message with Charlotte apologizing for her early departure. 3 hours later, she was on a plane back to her research station, putting physical distance between herself and the mistake she feared would cost her the most important relationship of her life. Back in the familiar confines of her laboratory, surrounded by the plants that had always made more sense to her than people, Naomi tried to lose herself in work. But Julian's words echoed in her mind, along with the memory of his touch, gentle yet certain, as if he had been waiting a lifetime to hold her. Had she made the right choice in running? Or had she, in trying to protect their friendship, destroyed the possibility of something far more profound? As days passed with no contact between them, her choice, not his, as evidenced by the unanswered calls and messages accumulating on her phone, Naomi began to wonder if some mistakes weren't in the making but in the running away. Rainfall revelations. 2 weeks of silence stretched between them like an uncrossable chasm. Naomi buried herself in research, extending her working hours until her colleagues began to worry. The monsoon season had arrived at the tropical research station, bringing relentless rain that matched her mood, a persistent drumming that made the world feel small and gray. On the 17th day, as she hunched over soil samples in her laboratory, her assistant poked his head through the door. "Doctor." "Winters, there's someone here to see you." "I'm not expecting anyone," she replied without looking up from her microscope. "He says it's urgent." "A Mr. Reeves?" Naomi's head snapped up, her heart suddenly racing. "Julian is here? In Malaysia?" Before her assistant could answer, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway behind him. Julian, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, as though he'd traveled without rest. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "You're a difficult woman to reach when you're avoiding someone," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Naomi dismissed her assistant, with a nod, waiting until they were alone before speaking. "How did you find me?" "Charlotte told me which research station you'd gone to." Julian stepped further into the laboratory, his gaze taking in the organized chaos of her workspace. "Though she made me promise not to tell you it was her." "Why are you here?" Naomi asked, removing her latex gloves and lab coat, suddenly conscious of her appearance. Hair pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup, wearing the same clothes she'd put on yesterday. "Because you wouldn't answer my calls." He ran a hand through his damp hair, a gesture of frustration she remembered from their youth. Because I've spent 2 weeks trying to understand how you could share what we shared and then just disappear. Rain hammered against the windows, creating a cocoon of sound around them. Naomi crossed her arms, a defensive posture. I told you I needed time. Time, yes. Disappearing without a word? That's something else entirely. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the fatigue in his eyes. Do you know what I realized after you left? That this pattern between us is 20 years old. You run, I let you go, and we pretend nothing happened. What are you talking about? Senior prom, he said simply. After we danced, after I almost kissed you by the bleachers, you avoided me for a week. Naomi felt heat rise to her cheeks at the memory. That was different. We were teenagers. The summer before college, when we went camping with Daniel and Charlotte. We stayed up talking by the lake after they went to sleep, and you fell asleep with your head on my shoulder. The next morning, you insisted on riding back with Charlotte. Instead of me, Julian. Your 25th birthday, he continued relentlessly. I flew in to surprise you, and after too much wine, you told me I was the standard against which you measured every man you met. By morning, you were talking about your colleague Thomas and how you thought it might get serious between you. She stared at him, stunned by his recollection of moments she had deliberately pushed from her mind. You never said anything. Because I was afraid, he admitted, his voice softening. Afraid of losing you completely if I pushed for more. So I convinced myself that friendship was enough. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the laboratory in stark white light. In that brief moment of clarity, Naomi saw the truth written, plainly across his features, longing, fear, hope, all the emotions she'd been running from in herself. The night of the wedding wasn't champagne or nostalgia for me, Julian continued, taking another step toward her. It was 20 years of loving you finally breaking through the surface. His words hit her with physical force, stealing her breath. You can't mean that. I flew halfway around the world, tracked you to a remote research station, and am standing here soaking wet from a tropical storm, he said with a hint of his usual wry humor. I think that speaks to my sincerity. Despite herself, Naomi felt a smile tug at her lips. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. Only when necessary. His expression grew serious again. Naomi, I'm not asking for promises or certainties. I'm just asking you to stop running. To give us a chance to discover what we might be beyond friendship. And if it doesn't work? She asked, voicing her deepest fear. If we try and fail and lose everything we've built? Julian closed the remaining distance between them, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders. Then we'll have known. Finally, instead of spending another 20 years wondering. The simplicity of his answer, the truth of it, broke something open inside her. All the reasons she had constructed for running, their different worlds, the risk to their friendship, her own insecurities, suddenly seemed flimsy against the reality of him standing before her, having crossed oceans to find her. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely audible above the rain. So am I, Julian confessed, the vulnerability in his eyes matching her own. But I'm more afraid of never knowing what we could be. As thunder rumbled outside, Naomi made her choice. She reached up, her fingers tracing the contour of his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of stubble beneath her touch. And then she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Not in the heat of moment or the haze of champagne, but with clear-eyed certainty. When they broke apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. Does this mean you'll stop running? Naomi nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders. Though you might have to remind me occasionally. I can do that, he promised, his smile reflected in his eyes. For as long as you'll let me. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the past and nourishing possibilities yet to bloom. Seasons change. 1 year later, the botanical gardens of Somerset Valley erupted in autumn colors. Fiery maples, golden beeches, and the russet undergrowth that had fascinated Naomi since childhood. She walked familiar paths with new eyes, appreciating how the garden had evolved while maintaining its essential character, much like her relationship with Julian. "Are you sure about this location?" she asked, turning to where he stood examining the ancient oak tree that had witnessed so many of their childhood conversations. Julian nodded, running his hand along the bark. "This is where it all started. Seems fitting for a new beginning." In the 12 months since that rainy confrontation in Malaysia, they had navigated the transition from friendship to love with careful honesty. There had been adjustments. Julian restructuring his company to allow for more remote work, Naomi learning to share her traditionally solitary research process. They had argued and compromised, discovered new aspects of each other, and fallen deeper into a connection that had roots spanning decades. Now they stood beneath their oak tree, preparing for the small gathering that would unite their lives officially. No elaborate ceremony or media attention. Just close friends, family, and the natural world that had brought them together. "Dr. Winters?" A young woman approached, clipboard in hand. "The environmental science students are ready for your presentation. Whenever you are," Naomi smiled. The educational foundation she and Julian had established, funding research opportunities for students from underprivileged backgrounds, was perhaps her proudest achievement of the past year. Today's gathering doubled as both their wedding and the Foundation's first scholarship awards. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Priya. Thank you." As the assistant departed, Julian slipped his arms around Naomi's waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Having second thoughts about combining our wedding with Foundation business?" he murmured against her ear. She leaned back into his embrace. "Not at all. What better way to celebrate than by creating opportunities for the next generation?" They stood in comfortable silence, watching golden leaves spiral down around them. So much had changed, yet the essence remained: the deep understanding, the shared values, the ability to be fully themselves with each other. "I have something for you," Julian said eventually, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift, though it's really more of a promise." He handed her a small wooden box, hand-carved with intricate botanical patterns. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay not jewelry as she had expected, but a seed, small, unassuming, and filled with potential. "A dawn redwood," he explained, watching her expression. "One of the oldest species on Earth, once thought extinct until living specimens were discovered." Naomi cradled the seed in her palm, understanding the symbolism. "Something ancient made new again." Julian nodded, his eyes soft with emotion. "They can live for thousands of years. I thought we could plant it today, watch it grow alongside whatever we build together." The gesture, so perfectly aligned with who they were, individually and together, brought tears to her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered, closing her fingers gently around the seed. Later, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden, they stood before their gathered loved ones. Charlotte, now expecting her first child with Daniel, beamed from the front row. Colleagues from both their worlds mingled easily, boundaries between academia and industry dissolving in celebration. Their vows were simple, honest promises spoken beneath branches that had sheltered their childhood dreams. And when Julian slipped a ring onto her finger, a band of recycled gold set with small emeralds the color of new leaves, Naomi felt the rightness of their journey. "You once told me that in botany the strongest plants aren't those that grow in isolation," Julian said, his voice carrying clearly in the autumn air, "but those that form beneficial relationships with others, supporting and being supported in turn." Naomi smiled, recognizing her own words from years ago. "Mutualism," she replied. when both organisms thrive because of their connection. After the ceremony, as their guests enjoyed local, sustainable cuisine at tables scattered throughout the garden, Julian and Naomi slipped away to fulfill their promise. Together, they planted the dawn redwood seed in a specially prepared spot where future generations of students would study and learn. To new beginnings rooted in history, Julian said as they patted soil around the tiny potential giant. Naomi looked up at him. This man who had been so many things to her throughout her life, friend, confidant, challenger, and now partner in all things. And to finding the courage to let friendship grow into something even stronger. As dusk fell and lanterns illuminated the gardens, they rejoined their celebration. The foundation students approached one by one to thank them, each carrying dreams and ambitions that echoed Naomi and Julian's own youthful aspirations. "Look what we've started," Julian murmured, his arm secure around her waist as they watched the next generation of environmental pioneers discuss ideas beneath their oak tree. "This is just the beginning," Naomi replied, leaning into his embrace. And as stars appeared above the garden that had witnessed their journey from childhood friends to partners in life and purpose, Naomi knew with certainty that some relationships were meant to evolve, growing deeper and stronger with each passing season, their roots intertwining until it became impossible to see where one ended and the other began. Just like the ancient redwood they had planted, their love would grow from something small and fragile into something enduring, a legacy that would outlive them both, providing shelter and inspiration for generations to come.